Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO podcast. As always, my name is Andy and lots to cover today, including news from the upcoming hearings and some new developments in Washington, to some interviews that have happened online, some short films making the rounds, and of course a few listener questions and some announcements I'm very excited to be sharing with you today. So I want to talk about that first of all, and I may have mentioned on a couple of occasions that I've got a book coming out. So I've got a book launch event happening on Wednesday, September the 18th. I'm going to be at Thomas Tosh, and that is in Dumfriesshire in Scotland for the launch of the book. Tickets are only £5. So again, I'm guessing this will be for those of you in the UK, unless you want to travel thousands of miles to come and visit. But links in the description. The ticket includes a soft drink, a bottle of lager or a glass of wine. And if you buy the book on the night, the ticket knocks £5 off of the cover price, the £20 price of the book. So it's a win-win for you. So if you want to come along, hear me chat about the book, say hello, I would absolutely love to meet you there. But enough of me grifting about the book. The hearings, the historic hearings, I want to say, are happening this Tuesday, the 9th of September, 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. UK. The link is in the description to the YouTube live stream. If you're in the Discord, we'll be chatting during the event, and I'll have an instant reaction podcast out straight after the event, a breakdown later that night with Dan. Lots to cover. There are 4 witnesses though. First off, Jeff Nuccitelli, Vandenberg Air Force Base witness who collected testimony about the big red square that was seen above the base. Chief Alexandro Wiggins, who is a witness from the USS Jackson event in 2023. And of course, George Knapp, decades-long UFO journalist, is one that many folks have been talking about online. And just before I chat about George, of course, I'll mention the 4th witness and the less well-known of all 4 witnesses, Dylan Borland. Mr. Borland has a background through the Air Force in geospatial intelligence, pretty cool looking CV, a lot of things that I won't pretend to know what he done or why he done them, just things that I can see would potentially relate to those kind of secret programs that you might think someone has a skill set a la Liam Neeson to get involved in the UFO topic. So looking forward to seeing what the witnesses have to say. But like I mentioned, the biggest debate of the 4 witnesses has been around George Knapp. Personally, I'm a big fan of George and his work. You can question the relevance of a journalist testifying at the event. However, for me, I think George potentially will be there to represent whistleblowers who aren't appearing. Are these deep insider whistleblowers across the 4 witnesses that people were really hoping for? Folks who had worked at Area 51, working on exotic craft or non-human bodies? No, we're not at that stage yet. But let's see what comes of this. Representative Eric Burleson, part of the UAP Secrets Task Force, said on X, September 9th is about one thing: restoring trust. The American people should not be left in the dark about UAPs or the whistleblowers risking their careers to speak out. He also told Matt Laszlo of Askapol that the UAP caucus is rolling out a new strategy that is issuing formal interrogatories, written questions requiring sworn answers from agencies. These carry a legal weight. If agencies obstruct or give non-answers, Congress can escalate with subpoenas, contempt proceedings, even Department of Justice referrals. Burleson said the goal is to send shockwaves through the intelligence community. So there we go. Meanwhile, Representative Anna Paulina Luna spoke with Peter Scaffish through the Sol Foundation's new vehicle on their YouTube channel. She said Congress is being stonewalled. She pointed to programmes running outside of oversight, calling out the intimidation of witnesses. She also backed former whistleblower David Grush's credibility, citing her own military experience was a reason when she spoke to him, she could tell he was telling the truth, that he was credible, he was believable. And interestingly, Luna posted an image online of former Arrow director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, branding him the Pinocchio of Arrow, complete with the old long nose and everything. Interesting. So, overall, this hearing looks more like a platform to build off of rather than a blockbuster, and that might not thrill everyone, but let's see what happens first. We've only got a couple of days to wait depending on when you listen to this, and I'd love to know your thoughts. As soon as we hear those hearings, get in touch with me and let me know. Something folks have asked about, a question I'm getting quite a lot just now, is what happens if someone does lie to Congress under oath? You know, we're all used to the old movies with the put your hand on the Bible, hand on your heart and swear. In the US, and believe it or not, folks, I've had to look this up. So in the US, that is a federal crime. You may be surprised to hear, or not. Perjury or making false statements are punishable by up to 5 years in prison, sometimes more, if national security is involved. Here's the tricky part. So prosecutors must prove the person knowingly lied. Misremembering, misunderstanding, being vague isn't perjury. It only counts if they intentionally misled. Now, that's the issue. Think about that with UFOs. We're dealing with classified programs, disputed facts, personal testimony. Unless you have undeniable proof, like an email, a memo, or recording, it's very hard to prove that someone knowingly lied. Yes, people have been prosecuted before. From the Iran-Contra situation to steroid scandals. Iran-Contra was one that Danny Sheehan, I believe, was involved in, but convictions are rare. And with UFOs, it's even less likely because cases risk exposing classified material, and that's one of the things that's often hidden behind. We know that all too well, don't we? Speaking of Danny Sheehan, lawyer to the UFO stars and counsellor, he was on the show Paris on Politics, and he mentioned Jay Stratton, that they want him to testify, but he won't. And Jay Stratton is citing that whistleblower protections aren't strong enough to get people to come forward. Folks like Jay Stratton could lose his pension or be blocked from promotions, and it shows why we don't always get the quote-unquote higher level witnesses people expect. But we have to appreciate how brave it is for anyone to come forward. So make sure you check out those hearings on the 9th of September, 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. UK. You can work out the rest of the time zones from there, folks. Some other UFO updates and bits of news I think worth going over. Gary Nolan from the Sol Foundation, he was on Joe Rogan recently, and he began talking the interview. It's over 2.5 hours long, about his cancer research before diving into UFOs for about an hour into the show. The background was fascinating. Always interesting to hear what Gary Nolan does for a day job and how important that work is. He then talked about the UFO topic, about molten material allegedly dripping from UFOs, the samples he has, and the need for expert analysis of those samples, calling for people to come forward. He touched on getting into the topic, his early interest in the Atacama mummy situation, going into the Nazca mummies debate, and it's always worth remembering how important that work Gary Nolan does is, and why when he goes over that, it really brings a credibility to when he does talk about the UFO subject. So big shout out to Gary Nolan for that interview. Go and check it out over on Joe Rogan's podcast. The New Paradigm Institute, Danny Sheehan's New Paradigm Institute, released a 20-minute film with some gorgeous James Webb imagery, a John Mack voiceover, and a recap of the November 2024 UFO UAP hearings. It showed some declassified UAP images. Danny Sheehan stressed the need for Congress to investigate. My little bugbear with it was a few of the clips used, I'm pretty sure, have already been debunked. I'm sure one of them were the stadium lights in the fog, for example. It'd be great if productions could just be a little bit more careful in the imagery used. But overall, listen, it's a polished, simple, not overly sensationalist piece. Solid promo piece for the general public, and I think it would be good if folks did get to see this. So go and check it out on the New Paradigm Institute YouTube channel. I've got the link in the description. It's only 20 minutes long, but again, around this time of year, the hearings are going to get some new eyes and ears on the UFO topic, so definitely worth checking that out or sharing it online. Everything kind of helps. I don't think it's a bad piece at all, like I say, for folks to be checking out ahead of the hearings. It gets people caught up pretty quickly. Jake Barber has done a couple of interviews recently, and a pretty short one he done with Dr. Jim Garrison, former guest on this podcast. He's one of the guys over at Ubiquity University. Really interesting guy, Jim. He interviewed Jake Barber, who spoke about psionics, Pretty short interview again, 14 minutes long. Jake likened consciousness to the internet, a kind of digital network. Humans are like smartphones stuck in airplane mode, and we need to find that switch to turn that off and be more susceptible to the Wi-Fi or the force or the network around us. Jim compares it to remote viewing, suggesting ETs have mastered non-verbal, consciousness-based communication. Jake argued some people are naturally predisposed to these skills without knowing it, which makes sense. And those people may not know it because they never come forward and don't ever try it. They don't know they've got those. Great 14-minute chat. Check it out on Jake Barber's X account. I've not seen any other links to it. I'm sure they will be out there, folks. Speaking of other whistleblowers, Matthew Brown's Substack has his Part 2 released. I discussed Part 1 on our previous UFO news update. I'll put the link in the description to Part 2. So Part 2 of a series, The Journey to Becoming a UFO Whistleblower. It covers the years 2021 to 2025, and what a time to be alive it has been. A time of both progress and pushback. The Pentagon during that time issued the first UFO report, as we know, in over 50 years. Congress created Arrow, and we remember AIMSOG and all those kind of weird acronyms, and AIMSOG wasn't even right, was it, when you look at the actual initials, but it's what we all said. Open new whistleblower channels, tried to encourage people to come forward, but then when you think back to Luna publishing that picture of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick with a long nose, I'm guessing Kirkpatrick's name may be brought up at the upcoming hearing in a not so positive light. I would like to see him there to defend himself, either or, but it does show something, doesn't it, about what's been happening over the last few years and why people may not have come forward. But behind the scenes, Matthew Brown says a secret executive council of defence and intelligence leaders controlled Arrow, blocked investigations and monitored whistleblowers to protect the legacy programmes. The real holy grail shit, people, the stuff that we really want to hear from. Again, I always use that Brent Spiner character from Independence Day, who's been underground working on the legacy programme on the crashed craft with the bodies. That's what we want, and we're still not there yet. In that time, that 21 to 25 period, that was the time where David Grush testified in 2023. Matthew Brown himself later wrote the Immaculate Constellation document, cleared it through the State Department, had it published, and it was presented by Michael Schellenberger in October 2024 at those hearings, or November, sorry. Soon after, Schellenberger, Lou Elizondo, Mike Gold and co. testified to Congress. There was the whole drama with Corbell had actually brought Brown in the report forward, but most folks know that story now. If you don't, go and check out my interview with Jeremy Corbell. 11 out of those 12 pages of Brown's report made it into the record, but momentum stalled. Other crises stole the headlines. Of course, we know about multiple wars and going on throughout the world. The UAP Disclosure Act failed again. Attempt number 3 of that is about to go through, and disclosure was sort of shelved or pushed aside as we wait for it to be taken off the shelf like one of Andy's toys in Toy Story. So as Brown himself tells it, progress on one hand, organised resistance on the others, and how are we going to get past that, folks? So lots of little tidbits of news ahead of those hearings, and I want to get to some listener messages as part of this podcast as well. Like I say, quick news update, because really I want to also get folks' thoughts and opinions on those hearings after they happen. So when they've happened, there's going to be a reaction pod afterwards from myself going through the highlights for those who haven't seen it, and my quick thoughts, and then that night I'll record the breakdown, hopefully having Dan on with me on that one as well. So lots of shows to come on that. Some listener questions that have come in over the last couple of days. Claire wrote in about the so-called Lockheed Tic Tac manual I spoke about on a previous UFO news update. She saw it as sloppy disinformation, but wonders if gatekeepers are trying to frame exotic tech as human-made. That way, instead of admitting non-human intelligence, blame shifts to a greedy corporation like Lockheed. Still a betrayal, but less reality-shattering, and the non-human intelligence angle gets buried for another century. Really interesting perspective. So my thoughts on that one, Claire, it's one of those, there's so much disinformation getting put out there, or misinformation, that any truth gets lost in that mess, doesn't it? And that could be what's happening. Interesting timing that manual surfaced around this time. Again, like anything online, you tend to hear, well, this was actually online years before, but no one was checking it out. It surfaced on Reddit in 2012, and we hear that with was it the gimbal video was online, or one of the 3 videos, I forget now, that came out in 2017, had been online years before. But it just depends as and when this kind of stuff comes up. And it makes it difficult to work out what is right and what isn't right, especially in this age of AI. But there was so much people identified as being wrong on that. But I suppose you have to think of the layers of interest in this topic, then the main one being that public layer, the real surface level. They'll read the headlines, but they won't even click into an article. They won't check out a podcast. They won't check out a blog unless they've got a big interest in the topic or some kind of interest in the UFO topic. So when they see that Tic-Tac manual, it was Lockheed Martin, a lot of folks will read that. And I have a friend called Colin who, shout out to Colin, he's the co-host of the Wrong Term Memory podcast. And Colin, lovely guy, very good podcaster as well. Colin is one of those guys, though, who reads a headline and then doesn't really pay much more attention to the detail. And this isn't to do with the UFO topic. This is just any kind of story in general. Colin loves a sensational headline, but he reads that, and that's pretty much it for Colin. No offence, and he won't listen to this. He's not into UFOs. But that's what Colin does. And then sometimes I'm listening to him and I'm shaking my head laughing because he's a funny guy. And that podcast covers kind of pop culture stuff and up to date and crazy headlines and poo jokes. But if he just read the body of the article or done a little bit more research, he would kind of find the detail and what was right and what was wrong. And I'm not a huge detail guy. I try to be for the UFO topic. But I suppose when people online, the public see Tic-Tac manual, they see Lockheed Martin, they put 2 and 2 together, they get 4, and there's the Tic-Tac case debunked for hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, whatever it may be. And that can be frustrating. So in a sense, it's done its job. You know, people listening to this, people watching this, perhaps the UFO community, that's fine. You know, we look at that and we can see it's been debunked. But for a lot of folks, they don't get to that layer. They don't dig down deep enough to that kind of next layer and next level. And that's a big frustration in the UFO topic. So thank you for that one, Claire. Interesting perspective. Again, folks, please share yours. Michael asks, why Stephen Greer? Dr. Stephen Greer, to give him his full title, and he does ask to be called Dr. Greer, hasn't been considered to testify. He points out that Greer has claimed officials once offered him serious money to stay quiet. I'm sure, is it not billions of dollars? And I said billions, folks, to stay quiet. Whatever you think of him, Michael argues that, you know, he could bring more damning evidence than some journalists. Maybe Congress sees him as too controversial, but it's a fair question. Do you know what? In a kind of morbid curiosity way, Michael, I would love to see Stephen Greer testify. In many ways, I would probably swap out, thinking out loud here, folks, I would maybe swap out any of the witnesses in the upcoming hearing for Dr. Greer. For multiple reasons, but it is that kind of driving by the car crash and watching it when you shouldn't, you know, rubbernecking, as we call it here in the UK. I don't know if you call it that elsewhere, but yeah, it would be a kind of morbid curiosity that, oh God, this is going to go badly. What's he going to say? And I just don't think Stephen Greer's the right person yet to be talking at a hearing that they're trying to take seriously. Not to say the previous hearing was necessarily earth-shattering. I think I voiced my quiet disappointment at the previous hearing without it being the old nothing burger that people like to say. But there's one for you folks. What do you think on that? The idea of Stephen Greer testifying. What I'll say, folks, is I posted on Patreon to ask people, right now, the UFO leadership to you, who is it? So a lot of discussions I've had on here and a lot of comments, and I love the back and forward via email, via DM, and however people get in touch with me. Of all the names in the public sphere, who do you think are maybe the top 3 people that are leading the conversation right now? And that's a very subjective and personal thing, that there is no right or wrong answer. So I got a lot of comments on it. I'll read through some of them now, and this kind of gives you a flavour as to where people are at, I think, with the conversation. So thank you, anyone over on Patreon who got involved. The Human Neutrino, always welcome commentator, said, Gary Nolan, after seeing him on Joe Rogan, the way he discussed the topic, I think it puts him number one. I'll just say I would probably have Dr. Gary Nolan right now in my number one spot there. For that reason, I think he discusses the topic incredibly well. He's a strong personality, and you see that with his social media posting. But he's an incredibly intelligent guy. He doesn't need the UFO topic. He is successful in his own right. He is qualified in so many different ways that I couldn't even rhyme off what those are, especially with that cancer immunology work. To have someone like that discuss the UFO topic is only credible for the UFO topic. Unless you're Dr. Stephen Greer, who claims that Gary Nolan's a CIA asset and has been paid off. Complete nonsense. In my opinion, I always say. Ross McLeod mentions Daniel Elizondo, the author of the Loose Threads. Daniel Elizondo, that was him, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure. How could I forget, he says. Lisa Oliver said, Gary Nolan, Avi Loeb and Diana Pasulka. Off the top of my head, I'm old enough to remember Timothy Good. He was my gateway into all of this. I also really rate Leslie Kane's book that came out about 10 years ago or so. Yeah, good list. Covers some bases there as well. Very scientific and academic. Liam Carter says, sorry, realised I didn't actually answer the question with my rant. I'll get to Liam's rant in a second. If I had Robert Bigelow, Jacques Vallée and Jake Barber, again, that covers some interesting bases there, folks. Long Knife says, who's doing the most right now? My thought on who is creating the most action would be Burleson and Luna in the US House for the upcoming hearing, Corbell and Knapp for continuing to be an alternative clearinghouse to Arrow for whistleblowers. And number 3, he says, the podcasters, you, Jesse Michaels, UAP Gerb and Rogan, are putting the info out to tens of millions of people who otherwise would have little to no exposure to the subject. I am still very much a grassroots podcast, folks, not quite breaking into the millions per episode just yet. I think I'd have a much nicer studio if and when I do that. But yeah, some big names there alongside my own, so thank you. And they do put out some great content, especially from a YouTube platform point of view. Thank you to anyone watching this on YouTube. But yeah, those guys do real proper YouTube shows with a lot of great production values that maybe I'll get to that level one day and not have this black photography sheet as a background in a shed. The Truth is Up There said, some Scottish guy in the northeast, he's got a book out around about now. Very good. Seems to know what he's talking about, has plenty of contacts, been kicking about for about 5 years now. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, so that is obviously me, and not a chance. Though Dubs number 2 says, Avi Loeb, the guy has long-standing respect in the community and brings logical thought process every time. Diana Pasulka, with a journalist ethos and a cool head during interviews, I believe her outsider status gives her enormous credibility. And said me again, but yeah, I appreciate the nice comments, folks, but yeah, I'm definitely not one of those. I'm just happy to talk about the subject, and thank you for listening to me do so. Nick said, I would have said I was hopeful for David Grush, Jake Barber and Matthew Brown at different points, but now I'm not so sure. Not sure who it is now. Eric Burleson, Carl Nell and Gary Nolan. Carl Nell is a big shout on that one. Quietly present in the UFO topic, and I look forward to, I'm going to the Sol Foundation's symposium in Milan at the end of October, really looking forward to going there, and Carl Nell is one of those folks who are just going to be talking, which I'm very much looking forward to, and over those days I'm looking forward to bringing you some content from the event itself. Kenzo said, Lester Nari seems to be the most organised leader making things happen behind the scenes and bringing people together as well as Danny Sheehan. Yeah, Lester's a wonderful gent, always very courteous when I've had Lester on the podcast, doing a lot of work with the UAP Disclosure Fund and some other things behind the scenes as well. Kevin mentions Jacques Vallée, Diana Pasulka. Both are strong voices for the deep historical and spiritual connections to the phenomenon. Gary Nolan for his scientific perspective with the Sol Foundation and of course his Skywatcher involvement and his leadership in bio and materials analysis. And finally David Grush for what he's done as a whistleblower and hopefully will continue to do so even as behind closed doors. Again, just to fire off on these final ones, folks, to wrap up this kind of short news update. Lindsay Stewart said Gary Nolan, Diana Pasulka and Richard Dolan. Good mix there. Fred said Colonel Christopher Mellon, who's a lot quieter these days than he used to be on the UFO topic. And Richard Dolan thrown in there by Fred. A lot of love for Diana Pasulka there, who wrote the foreword to my book, cheap plug. And Richard Dolan, who wrote a nice piece for me on the back of the book as well. I'm going to read Liam's answer, okay, because I said before he had a bit of a rant, and I think I like to read both sides of the coin, read both sides of the coin. Christ almighty, that's a bad use of English language. You get what I mean, though. Liam said, to be honest, I think that's the problem to begin with. I think it's been all about the people in ufology and less about the subject. I also think it's getting intellectualised and philosophised to death. I mean, I'm deep down the rabbit hole with all the Jacques Vallée theories, and I think that's part of it, but I still believe there's a nuts and bolts aspect to this. It may be wishful thinking, but there are too many cases where it's not absurd or crazy, and the UFO is seemingly going about its business, possibly not aware it's being observed. I'm glad the subject is getting some heat, don't get me wrong, but I'm so sick of the American drama that seems to be going with it. So yeah, Liam sticking the boot in there. In a well put forward argument, I think the American drama side of things just naturally comes with the political integration of the subject as it is at the minute. And to finish off, a couple more. Russell said Chris Mellon, Gary Nolan, Anna Polina Luna. Unidentified said Tom Sylvester, who is the Deputy Director of Operations at the CIA, John Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard. So some interesting, more senior official types on that list, which is cool. Sauerkraut said Richard Dolan, Gary Nolan, George Knapp and Karen Austin, who is the project manager of the Archives of the Impossible. I'd love to get Karen on one time on the podcast actually as well. That would be pretty good. Windermere said 3 is not enough. So for historic knowledge, Richard Dolan. For science, Avi Loeb and Jake Barber to crack open the egg and show us the truth. But we need Danny Sheehan to hold us accountable that have done unconstitutional things to keep the truth from us for 80 years. So yeah, thanks for that. And Ross McLeod said Matthew Pines, Gary Nolan and Lester Nari. Jeff Kripal would be top of Ross's list. So yeah, really appreciate that. Oh, and mentioned Gary Lackman with a pinch of Kelly Chase as well. So thank you to everyone who sent that stuff in over on Patreon. Really appreciate it. And I just want to finish off with a little bit of a note from a friend of mine, and you'll know Ryan Sprague, who of course hosts Somewhere in the Skies. Quick plug for his Anomicon 2025, a free virtual conference on September 20th, which will be streaming across YouTube, Twitch, X and Facebook. Ryan Sprague's project, now in its third year, you're going to hear from voices like Michael Ian Black, Dr. Beatrice Villarreal, Mitch Horowitz, Peter Robbins and more. The host and master of ceremonies will be Jim Harold, with music from Septembrio, Sunspot, Beach Creeper and One Night in Paris. All day free. September 20th. Visit anomicon.com for details. Subscribe to Ryan's Summer in the Skies channel to join the live chat as well. So there we are, folks. UFO news update for you ahead of what is going to be a huge week for the UFO topic, for better or for worse. I can't promise you that, just that there will be a lot to talk about and a lot to dissect after Tuesday, round about 12 p.m. Eastern, I imagine, when the hearings finish. So yeah, my book launch on the 18th in Dumfries at Thomas Tosh, hearings on the 9th, Anomicon on the 20th. Plenty happening in between as well. I've got loads more listener questions, folks. I'm keeping for breakdowns and whatnot. I'll keep them for UFO news updates as well. Thank you to anyone who sent anything in. Please use the email, or if you can't, use the contact form on the website, thatufopodcast.com/contact. That will let me get your stuff in a much more neater and compact place, and I can use it on future shows as well. So thank you at this point, folks, for listening. Thank you for watching, and ahead of a huge week, speak to you very, very soon.